the comedy of the Restoration period. Often called the comedy of manners, this wasn't just a genre that entertained society, it held up a wildly exaggerated, incredibly glamorous mirror to it. If you're into sharp dialogue, high fashion, and drama fueled entirely by scandal, you are absolutely going to love this. Now picture this for a second. Imagine an entire society literally starved of public entertainment. Back in 1642, a strict Puritan ordinance came down and completely shuttered the theaters in England. That means for nearly 2 full decades, the stages were dark, the music stopped, the public drama just vanished. So you have to ask, what happens when you suddenly throw all those restrictive rules out the window after 18 years? Well, you get an absolute explosion of culture. You can actually trace this roller coaster right here. We've got that dark period starting in 1642, but the real story, the real explosion kicks off in 1660 with a royal return. The genre hits its absolute peak in the late 17th century, only to run face first into a massive moral backlash by 1698, which leads to a pretty steady decline in the early 1700s. Let's unpack exactly how all of this played out. Act 1. The Royal Revival and King Charles II. This whole era was basically ignited by a single spark, King Charles II returning from his exile in France. And when he came back to England in 1660, he didn't just bring himself. He brought back the highly worldly, very sexually permissive French court tastes he picked up along the way. He immediately granted royal patents to 2 very specific companies, the King's Company and the Duke's Company. Because of this royal monopoly, the theater wasn't for the everyday masses anymore. It was exclusively tied to fashionable upper-class society. It was directly shaped to entertain and satirize the very aristocratic class that was sitting in the audience watching it. Basically, it was this elite echo chamber of high fashion and very loose morals. Act 2. A historic shift on the stage. Now, this wasn't just a minor casting update. The introduction of professional actresses completely revolutionized the stage. Before 1660, women's roles were played by young boy actors. But with Charles II's return, women were finally professionally allowed to perform. This directly pushed playwrights to write far more developed, much more complex female characters. It also led to this massive craze for breeches parts. These were roles where actresses would dress in men's clothing, which, let me tell you, was a huge, shocking novelty at the time. All of this just poured gasoline on an intense, gossip-filled, scandal-driven publicity machine around the theater that seriously rivaled anything we see in modern tabloid culture today. Act 3. The Archetypes of the Era. You really can't have a genre built on aristocratic satire without some highly specific, deeply recognizable characters. Every great drama needs a charismatic bad boy, right? For the Restoration, that was absolutely the Rake. The Rake is your charming, often utterly ruthless, sexually predatory male protagonist. The audience just ate it up. They loved watching him engage in these elaborate, deeply cynical seduction schemes, completely ignoring traditional morality to get exactly what he wanted. But you can't have the Rake without his perfect comedic foil. Enter the fop. Where the Rake was effortlessly cool and always successful, the fop was, well, he was affected, foolish, and entirely obsessed with fashion. He tried way too hard to be witty. He cared way too much about his clothes, and the aristocratic audience just loved to laugh at him. He was the ultimate representation of ridiculous social pretension. And of course, the Rake needed a true equal. That brings us to the witty heroine. Thanks to those newly developed female roles we talked about, we get these incredibly clever female leads. I mean, they could go toe-to-toe with any Rake on stage, engaging in this sharp, rapid-fire verbal sparring. This highly intelligent, epigrammatic dialogue was literally the lifeblood of the comedy of manners. At the very heart of all this was the era's central social satire. Playwrights absolutely loved setting up a merciless contrast between sophisticated town society, meaning the fashionable London elite, and what they saw as naive country folks. The country bumpkin was basically the classic target for the sophisticated urbanites to trick, mock, and ultimately outsmart. So to really cement what made this genre tick, let's look at its core signatures.
It was all about the upper class obsessing over their sexual and social intrigues. We're talking marriage, adultery, money, and reputation. They ruthlessly skewered false wit and hypocrisy. And crucially, they had a very frank, often explicit treatment of sex that later moralists in the 18th and 19th centuries found completely appalling. Mix in some incredibly complex, highly cynical plots full of disguises and mistaken identities, and you have a recipe for pure theatrical chaos.
Act 4. The legendary Playwrights. Behind all these rakes, fops, and wits were the heavy hitters who perfected the genre. Look at George Etheridge up top. His 1676 play, The Man of Mode, popularized the archetypal rake, Dormant. Fun fact, Dormant was actually believed to be modeled on a real-life courtier. Then you've got William Wycherley's The Country Wife, famous for a shockingly explicit plot, where the rake Horner fakes impotence specifically to seduce married women. But watch how the genre evolves. William Congreve brings us to the absolute high point of wit with The Way of the World in 1700. It features this famous proviso scene where the hero and heroine negotiate their marriage terms as total equals, a wildly proto-feminist concept for the time. Speaking of which, Aphra Behn completely shattered the glass ceiling with The Rover in 1677. She was the very first English woman to earn a living as a professional writer, brilliantly centering female desire right in the middle of the standard rake and intrigue formula. And finally, George Farquhar marks the transition in the early 1700s, shifting the settings away from the elite town and into slightly more provincial, sentimental territories.
Which leads us to Act 5, the moral backlash and decline.
Because, let's be honest, this golden age of sexual frankness and aristocratic excess couldn't last forever. In 1698, the party essentially ended with a single pamphlet. A guy named Jeremy Collier dropped a scathing moral attack called A Short View of the Immorality and Profaneness of the English Stage. This wasn't just a grumpy review. It was a devastating cultural critique that gave a massive voice to the growing public backlash against the extreme cynicism on stage.
So, why did Collier's attack actually stick? Simple. The audience was changing. As the early 18th century rolled in, the middle class began to rise, and they brought vastly different moral tastes with them. They absolutely did not want to see cynical rakes getting away with adultery anymore. So theatrical culture shifted toward what became known as sentimental comedy, stuff that was more didactic, heavily moralizing, and just a lot safer. The Restoration comedy of manners found itself heavily criticized, not just for its lack of morals, but for its incredibly narrow elite class focus. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a real head-scratcher, a provocative question that keeps this era fiercely debated in critical and feminist circles even today. When we look at trailblazers like Aphra Behn or Congreve's brilliant heroines, we really have to ask, did these witty women truly achieve agency and beat a patriarchal system using their intelligence? Or, within this deeply cynical, marriage and money-obsessed world, were they simply playing their assigned parts in just another elaborate game? It's a fascinating thought to chew on as we close the curtain on one of history's most scandalous stages.